resumption of the archaic Tartuffery of Agamemnon in connection to the debate between Zizek and Baron Hannan in the Cambridge Union, attempts at piercing some of the ultimate questions and a movement towards Heidegger's deconstruction of theoria afforded us, hopefully through giving candor in image to Zizek's position vis-a-vis Marxism. So Zizek made this comment, which is basically the occasion for this attempt to move towards Heidegger, which is a nice clarification with respect to the meaning of Marxism for the left. So one could make a division for the sake of analytic clarity, derivative on the notion of Marxism as a whole. So taking Marxism as something that we can make deductions from, we can then split it up and say there's this economic theory in Marxism, which is basically Adam Smith, plus the notion that Adam Smith, plus a sort of Anatole France addition to Adam Smith, whereby Marx says what Adam Smith thinks doesn't work because the people, that the owners, the supply side, will always tyrannize over the workers because they can pay them as little as they want and then create artificial scarcity of jobs if they want. And a lot of them will always be in a bad way, and therefore, and at the same time, they'll do something like government takeover, and so something in modern terms like corporations having more political charge than the ostensible political order. So that's one way of understanding, approaching Marx, the economic theory, with its theoretical basis in the notion that all value comes from labor, in contradistinction to the ancient theory that all value comes from labor or productivity, in contradistinction to the ancient theory that organization and therefore intellect is the main source of human value. Then you could have another Marx, which is about the 1848 revolutions and obstruction to the powers that be, and you could even say there's some third Marx on a different philosophic level. But so the statement Zizek is making is that the continuation of Marxism, in his view, has to do with the real desires of for actual change of suffering people. But what's interesting is he says that what I just said should be understood as being read into the theoretical principle of Marxism, so that the theory is then tied up with the empirical world of those people and their pathos, rather than um, Socratic theoria. But this has come down to us through the Christian notion. Um, so Socratic theoria is understood as the most fine form of movement that's possible. That the mind has a form of movement which consists of understanding the arche, or the original principles of any issue, such as, for instance, Montesquieu has given a statement of the arche of government in his form of natural law, which Americans have adopted with the separation of powers principle. In other words, law that has been discovered rather than built up, according to that view. What was particularly interesting in the discussion was the question of who's arguing in a popular fashion, the populares fashion, to use the Roman terms. Caesar was a member of the populares party, whereas Cicero was a member, Caesar, who actually came from the patrician class. Cicero, who came from the underclasses, was for the optimates. And this has something like the Claude Levi-Strauss issue of that tribe which drew a picture of their village where the people that were part of the upper classes drew a circle and then a circle within the circle to indicate the layout of the village. The people that were part of the underclasses drew a division down the middle of the circle. It's like inimical parties. The optimates say that what they're doing is trying to gain the approval of the best people. So this is like the Socratic notion of arguing towards the wise, not towards the fools, or in later terms, in the medieval Christian terms, one can think of the saying that Aristotle is the master of those who know, or maybe we could change that to say the teacher of those who know, maestro of those who know, perhaps, if you don't like the word master. But that's how it looks to the optimates. Look at it the other way around. Caesar who is actually a patrician, is saying he doesn't say we're arguing for the sake of having the most impact on the vulgar, but rather he says we're for the vulgar, we're for improving their lot. He claims to be improving their lot. So actually both sides argue in a different way. One says, so if you use the optimate way of speaking of the populares, you'd have to say Caesar is arguing to the lowest common denominator. He's arguing in such a way that he gains the approval of stupid people, in other words. But of course, Caesar doesn't put it that way. He argues. So how would Caesar? So you could see both poles in the light of the other pole, just like you have this so-called parallax view with this village issue. So Socrates, however, presents himself just like Zizek. Zizek prides himself on being a quote-unquote normal guy and also a philosophic guy. So this is the same thing as that Socrates knows all the gossip around Athens. He's like a normal guy mixed up in all kinds of weird stuff. He's not with his head in the cloud falling into wells only, but he's also sitting there in a daze for hours on end. People look at him, what's Socrates doing? His eyes are glaring over. He's also in the philosophic realm. There's a double vision. And then this guy Hannan, so far as one can tell, he argues totally to the lowest understanding. Many of the things he said about Marx were flatly false, but he can get away with it because it's hard to be pedantic in the middle of a discussion, which is on a television show or YouTube show, even if it's in the Cambridge Union, because it has to be argued at the level of the popular audience. It's not a classroom where there'll be a test at the end. So I'm trying to get towards the theoretical issue. And so the Agamemnon issue I'm thinking of is that Agamemnon, as the counterpart of Zeus among men, of the Olympian, highest of the Olympians among men, has this status of being cursed. So the curse is like this ticklish, this tickle factor that Zizek's talking about in the ticklish subject. Agamemnon is, even though Agamemnon is the representative of the order, the highest representative of the order, he's cursed. So it reminds of the Kennedys, right? There's curse of the Kennedys in a way. So is Agamemnon in a way subject to a stasis, to obstruction, which affects even the head of even the inner circle, even the head of the circle, such that the saying of Aeschylus that envy appanage of bliss, so that whenever you have somebody in this innermost circle, there's going to be some people that hate that person, which have the good form of resentment against this person, apparently, because, in other words, if the order isn't perfect, if the political order isn't perfect, it makes sense that there'd be some drive within it which opposes it and which allows the order to be seen as a broken order. So even within the part of the tribe that sees the split as between the circle and the inner circle, there's this shadow of the stasis falling over Agamemnon and the Atrides. But all this to approach the notion that there's a crossover here, so that the part of the village which is seeing things in terms of animicus, because we're not talking about enemies, we're talking about animicus, because we're not talking about outsiders, but within the same society, this inimical relationship between the circle broken in half, between the two halves, and maybe with the trumpets claiming their half is larger, something like that. This view is also has something happening which corresponds to it within a microcosm of the view of the circle and the circle of the other side. In the having prepared this a little bit, and I hope people will write in and ask where the points where it's radically unclear and we need more candor, but I tried to prepare that so that we can then ask, what is the meaning of this theoria in Marx, where the theoria is driven by the so-called real desire for actual change of the suffering people, rather than within the circle of the part of Socratic philosophy which corresponds to death or Anubis, or to the pure reasoning,